How are you guys?
Doing
So
great.
we have a great cross-section of the esports industry. We have Heather, who does fan engagement for Team Dignitas, which is owned by the Sixers.
Correct.
And you were a former pro esports player. We have Stratton Sklavos from Vision Venture Partners, and you used to be the CEO and owner of the San Jose Sharks, right? And now you have owned an esports team as part of the fund. And then Craig Berry, who's Chief Content Officer for Turner Sports, which is obviously now getting into esports. So I want to start off with a quick story. I was in the Westfield Mall the other day, and anyone who follows the business world knows that retail is dead or dying. But the one store that was packed was Razer Gaming, a hardware manufacturer, and they were holding a tournament inside of the store. And it was so crowded I couldn't even go in to check it out. And I think that's kind of a sign of how fast this industry is growing. But I want to start with you, Heather. Tell me a day in the life of an esports player. How is it different than a pro athlete?
So our professional players, we got to get them up early in the morning, but we usually start the day around 10 a.m.
That's not real early.
That's not really early, yeah. It's hard for a gamer. They practice for about 3 hours, and a lot of our teams have a live-in chef. So the chef will prepare them lunch, so they get about an hour break. After that, then they have what's called demo reviews. So they're going to watch what they did in the morning and talk about it and how do they fix that for the evening. And then they'll play for about another 5 hours. And that will be practice, preparation for upcoming games. Then they have required gym time, so they go to the gym for about an hour. And then after that is their personal time. So generally in their personal time is they're also playing video games. So they're preparing, doing individual strategies. That's for this team, for example, League of Legends teams. But there's also teams that travel very frequently, especially games like Counter-Strike. Some of those teams are traveling every single weekend throughout the world. So it's a very intense practice and travel schedule.
And you've been in esports for a while, I guess, starting as a player. But Craig and Stratton, tell me a bit, I guess, about how you guys first kind of caught wind of the esports world, and I assume you've scaled up tremendously your involvement. Maybe Stratton, you can start.
I grew up here in San Francisco, was in Silicon Valley for 30 years, a lot of high-tech stuff, VeriSign being my last site. Oh, there we go. Better? Still not.
Maybe Craig, do you want to go and they'll come?
Yeah, go.
Can you hear me? Okay. We kind of, obviously we're in the traditional stick and ball space, NBA on TNT, March Madness, MLB, and we started, but at our core, we're a sports content creation company. So a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, we saw esports starting to bubble up, and we also run a lot of digital businesses from Bleacher Report and NBA.com and NCAA.com and PGA.com, and so we saw a real opportunity of a marriage between a native digital space, sports space, and a content creation opportunity. So when I kind of went out into the ecosystem, so to speak, to kind of do research and the due diligence around esports, I saw obviously what everybody else is exposed to in the Newzoo, is that what it's called? The Newzoo, and these gargantuan metrics. I went to some tournaments and some conferences, and I quickly realized that these gargantuan metrics were ultimately the collective of this space. So it was inclusive of these global numbers that included all platforms, PC, console, mobile, game sales, and microtransactions, et cetera. And so when you kind of get it back to the North American business, which Turner is focused on, although we're a global company and we have a global footprint and we understand the importance of esports as a global entity, the domestic audience is where we thought there was really kind of an opportunity. So when we finally decided that we would get into this space, we knew that we've had to differentiate ourselves. And for us, it was simply kind of like, can we create an authentic product with a higher level of production and a richer narrative? And can we build a brand that people care about? E-League is not actually a league at all. It's a tournament-based content company, asset that creates high-end content around multiple platforms and multiple games. So first and foremost, we wanted to be authentic to the community. We kind of wanted to build it from a grassroots perspective. We say, and I know this is cliche, we say like if it's good for esports, it's good for Turner. So we got in obviously, with Counter-Strike for the first year and the first 2 seasons, and since then we've diversified into Street Fighter, into Injustice 2, and we did a content approach around the international that was narrative based, and we believe in being really dynamic and from a content creation standpoint, and that kind of leads us to where we are now.
So Stratton, your turn. How do you go from being the CEO of a professional hockey team to an esports team owner?
Quite surprisingly, actually. So again, I was saying earlier, I grew up here in San Fran. I was in the Valley for 30 years in high tech. I ran VeriSign for 12 years, and then went off into venture capital. And as I was moving to LA, I was going to start an early stage tech fund down there. A good friend of mine is Rick Fox, a 3-time NBA champ with the Lakers, and another partner of ours, Ahmet Rosada. And then we were at dinner one night, and I was telling him about this. And they said, well, you should really come look at this Echo Fox team we have. And that's when they explained competitive video gaming and esports. And we've gone from one team of League of Legends, 7 players, to now 10 teams, 41 players, competing in 12 different leagues, and a combined social media fan base that's gone from about 1.5 million to 15 million now. So it's an incredible opportunity. This is a pro sports ecosystem with teams, players, and fans. You've got leagues that have league level broadcast rights and league level sponsorships. You've got content creation partners, and you've got distribution partners like ESPN, Turner, or Twitch and Facebook. So we decided we were going to do an investment fund in esports. We have 3 companies now in that fund. One is Echo Fox, the team brand, which is named after obviously Rick and the group. The second one is Twin Galaxies, which is a league operator and a data services company like the Elias Sports Bureau and like a league like the NFL would be for certain games. And then the third one is Vision Entertainment, which is a full-on production studio, 3 24-hour-a-day studios in Beverly Hills shooting esports content. So we wanted to play in all the aspects of the ecosystem in esports, and it's going gangbusters.
So I want to talk about the fan base and the target demographic, because it's obviously very different than your Sunday NFL watcher. So Heather, your director of fan engagement, what is like the average esports fan, if you could say that?
The average esports fan it's been changing over the years. It used to be your usual like 18 to 24 male demographic, but that is changing over the years. So a lot more females are getting involved. For example, 17% of esports fans are female. Only a couple years ago, that was 2%. So that's drastically changing. It's a very social thing too. So it's not just kind of your stereotypical gamer, the ones that years ago you'd say, the person sitting in their basement playing games alone. That has changed. Very social game. Fans want to interact with their favorite players, and their favorite players want to interact with their fans. So it's incredibly social. Travel to these events too. It's not just sitting, but selling out massive arenas now, like the Staples Center and Madison Square Garden. So it's an incredibly diverse audience now. I was at an event last weekend, ESL One New York, and you don't just see the young males, but you see they're bringing their girlfriends or female fans, moms, dads, parents, kids. So it's really fascinating where it is today.
So, Craig, you obviously need a different approach to broadcast esports. It's not like a basketball game where you have an announcer and a 3-hour block of live sports. What changes do you need to make to kind of keep the esports audience engaged when they're watching live?
I mean, I think it's important to note that not all platforms are created equal, right? So esports is a native digital platform. We understand that. We also understand that having a broadcast network like TBS creates a portal for a casual fan. So we're not necessarily trying to convert hardcore fans to TBS. We're trying to create a portal for casual fans to walk through. So on TBS, we might teach people how to watch and teach people how to play, why we're ultimately broadcasting the competition. We're also starting to learn that narrative-driven content does better from a metric standpoint, from a rating standpoint, than streaming actual live competitions. So understanding the platform and what content resonates the best becomes a really important part of the strategy. Of course, whether it's Twitch or YouTube and streaming the native digital competitions will continue to be a super important part of the strategy. I'd also note that something that esports brings to the table that's a little bit different or unusual to traditional stick and ball spaces, engagement in general as a metric is quickly becoming the metric that we're all being judged on. And as important as ratings and CPMs are in the traditional platforms, the collective of engagement is ultimately the best way to and is essential to monetizing esports. Are they watching? Are they playing? Are they sharing? Like, we don't just go with a rating from TBS to the marketplace. We go with the collective brand metrics from the total engagement. This is something that is new and that we take lessons from and ultimately apply to the traditional stick and ball sports, in our case NBA, MLB, that we have a lot of value in this engagement that comes to the brand, whether it's via a broadcast network or social or mobile or digital, views, uniques, concurrents. These are all super important to the collective brand messaging and to the community. The last thing I'll say is, again, the traditional fan base is giving away to communities, and these communities are times 100 stronger than your traditional fan bases that you used to see, fans of the Lakers or fans of the Golden State Warriors. These are now large communities with huge influences on the way that we approach, the way that we execute, and create content around these platforms.
So Stratton, I want you to jump in, but let me kind of phrase it a bit. You're talking about communities building around these teams. Some leagues that are forming, like Overwatch, are doing city-based. So Philadelphia, we got a team this morning, I'm excited. But as someone who is a CEO of a city-based professional sports team, is that the way to do esports?
Well, I think the jury's out on that. I mean, in my opinion, it goes a bit against what we're seeing here of the global nature of this, the anytime, anywhere, the viewership. If you go look at Twitch on any particular streamer and the rest, it's more about the player, right? And it's more about kind of a global environment here. I'm not sure city-based it works in terms of local revenues and merchandising from the fan base that's going to go to that venue, since in that particular league, the venues for the first 2 years are actually going to be in LA, not city-based. So we'll see. I think it goes against kind of the digital trends and the millennial trend, but we'll see. To add on to what Craig was saying, though, we actually did a primetime event for the CW. It was a game called H1Z1 out of Daybreak Games, and we partnered with them and the CW, and we did a primetime show, 9 p.m. April 20th. It had gone live to tape, so we had been do exactly what you said. We were able to create the narratives around it, and it's a last man standing type thing. It's more or less the Hunger Games, right? 75 people all on the same stage. Now, all of those 75 players in the game have cameras behind them, right, inside the game. There are 6 roving cameramen, right, and then there's also director cameras within the game, so spectator cameras. So you have this incredible number of inputs that go in, and then if you can take it live to tape and do the post-processing on it, you can make it a very, very engaging show. It pulled the I agree with you. Traditional ratings are not the same, but it pulled a 0.3 rating that night, the same as the NHL hockey playoff game, which I thought was very amusing. And since that time, has gotten a lot of more interest in these things. I was watching ESPN2 this week, and one of our players, Sonic Fox, won the championship on a Injustice 2 tournament, and I had the same amount of excitement watching that as I did, the Sharks. It's really starting to come to where the engagement is there.
Yeah, it's fascinating. As the content landscape evolves and becomes more fragmented, people are worried about cord nevers and cord cutters. What's really happening is people, they're not stopping to watch, they're just watching in other places. And esports natively allows people to do that. And so that's why the collective becomes so important. Not other traditional stick and ball sports, it's still by appointment. You still have to go there. You still have to generally watch where you're told to watch. Esports gives you this really diverse platform base to work with, and it's much more conducive to a 21st century content consumption.
So I want to talk about the athletes, because that's a really interesting topic. And kind of until Twitter, Facebook, Instagram came out or became big a few years ago, the only real way to interact with professional sports athletes and develop a bond with a team was like seeing them in person after the game, or like going to meet and greet and like paying $100 for an autograph. But Heather, with like the rise of the internet, that sounds dumb, the rise of the internet. But I guess what I'm trying to say is, are younger fan bases interacting with esports players differently than you would see, a 50-year-old man waiting for an autograph after a game from a basketball player?
Yeah, absolutely. So you have essentially this 24/7 access to your favorite players. So a lot of our athletes are very active on Twitter, very active on Facebook. Then after their practice, they're live streaming on Twitch, and they can engage with their fans there. A lot of them are doing different opportunities. Hey, maybe come chat with me in my Discord after the game as a benefit to being a subscriber. And then they're also going to events. So they're working with endemic and non-endemic sponsors. We specifically work with Buffalo Wild Wings, so we're getting our players out to restaurants and meet and greets, and hey, let's watch E-League together and share a beer and share some wings. So there's far more opportunities now to engage with their favorite players.
Nice plug, thank you.
And just as a follow-up, yesterday we had an athlete here, and he said something on Twitter that the fans didn't like. I guess for old-style athletes, there was kind of a privacy barrier. You'd go home, you'd drive out of the private tunnel after the game, and you could kind of be on your own until the next game. Are there risks of kind of like players saying the wrong things? Do players need to be like watching themselves 24/7, especially because esports kind of has a history of athletes saying some bad things, I guess.
Yeah, certainly, and especially the past 15 years or so, there were really no restrictions. Players said whatever they want and without repercussions. That's starting to change now. So, for example, we work very closely with the Philadelphia 76ers. All of our players get very intense media training so that they can have that that knowledge on how to speak with the audience, not say the things they shouldn't say. That being said, these players are certainly a little more vocal than your traditional professional athlete, and they do have to be watched a little. They do cross some barriers.
Yeah. See, I don't think it's any different than professional athletes. When we used to have the rookies come in at the Sharks every year, they needed a lot of training in how to be adults and how to be social responsible and the rest. And the culture in hockey is different than football, is different than basketball. Gears of War teams versus League of Legends teams, they're completely different personalities in these games. Like Gears of War, they're encouraged to actually be more aggressive during the broadcast. So it is something that the entire industry is going to have to help, right? The athletes get to another level, because we haven't really started telling the stories about the players, right? It's been a lot about the teams and the games. It's going to come where it's the players who you'll want to root for, and so it's going to be a cultural change for these kids as they grow up and they understand what their responsibility is of being a professional athlete.
So, Craig, as a broadcasting and content company, do you think building content around these players and kind of elevating them on a pedestal like a Michael Jordan status, is that the way to go to engage fans?
Absolutely. I mean, I think having an emotional connection to the players, who's the player you love to love, who's the player you love to hate, is essential for people to be emotionally connected and to create a narrative. I will also say, like, given the engagement on the esports platforms, plural, I think the fans in the community have a certain amount of equity in the way they connect with the players, not only the players, but all the way, the teams, the tournaments, the leagues, and even the games. They have the ability to, in their strength and numbers, have the ability to kind of change and have some ownership in the direction of the entire ecosystem. So that's really kind of exclusive to esports. Like, traditional stick and ball doesn't have that, and because of that equity and that kind of investment that they have, I think that you have a lot more of an emotional connection to the community overall, or to the ecosystem overall.
I think it's been interesting what you've done with the fighting games, and Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, and Injustice 2. Now there's so much excitement because you can see who these players are. It's a one-to-one correlation, whereas League of Legends, the rest, there's an abstraction between player and I think fan and character. In the fighting games, you see that, so it's almost like going to a boxing match or a UFC match, and you see that the crowds get really excited when the good move happens, and then the winner is elevated up to yet another level of personality. It's actually amazing to see.
So one of the issues is that the support for players in esports is definitely nowhere close to where it is in a professional sports league in terms of guaranteed salaries or health care or any of that stuff. So, and the lifespan's probably shorter. I mean, Heather, you were a professional athlete. You've retired, I guess. So tell me a bit about the lifespan and how important is it for teams to, I guess, develop an ecosystem to protect these players?
Sure. So, we're certainly looking at, what does the future look like for our players? Because I stopped playing when I reached 30 and I couldn't keep up anymore. But we want to do things to help the players' future. And so that's not just, giving that media training, but giving them brand training too. So how do they network? How do they build their personal brands? Because that not only helps us, but helps them for their future. So we're doing a lot of things to, introduce them to various sponsors and think about what life looks like after esports.
So Rick Fox is, obviously from the Laker organization, knows what it's like to be a pro and a champion, and knows what an organization is like that supports that team being a champion. From the Sharks, we had a similar thing where the last 10 years that I was there, we became one of the top 3 teams in playoff appearances every year. And that all happened for us when we got Joe Thornton to come from the Boston Bruins to the San Jose Sharks. And then the next year we got other free agents who said, well, if Joe's going to go there, it is. And then you build the practice facilities. Then you think, so we want to be the best place to play. We want to give our players the best tools off the field and the best tools on. We have sleep counseling, meal plans, housing. We have physical fitness required. We have behavioral psychologists there to coach these kids. If they're streaming 16, 17 hours a day, that is not healthy, right? So we actually make them go, stop streaming at midnight, right? And so there's a lot of these things that you have to do to be the best sports organization, and that's going to be true in esports. So we want EchoFox to be known like the Lakers or the Yankees or the Cowboys are in the next decade.
So many professional sports teams are like snapping up esports teams, and I think the Overwatch League that starts in January is about half teams owned by pro sports teams and half teams that have kind of spun out on their own and raised money as almost like a startup. What's the better model? I guess, Heather, as a player, do you want to be owned by a professional sports team?
Well, yeah, I mean, it gives us that access, not only financial backing, but it gives us access to the same tools, the same resources that those athletes have. So all of our teams go through Philadelphia for a week long of training. So they meet with a sports psychologist, a nutritionist, even the chef that's helping them prepare meals, helping them. For our Counter-Strike teams, they travel a lot. What are some great snacks to keep them mentally healthy? So gives us all these resources that we would have never imagined in our wildest dreams a couple of years ago. So it's definitely a huge benefit for our players.
That sounds so cheery and great, but at the same time, I mean, the cynicist in me, like, is that taking away the fun and kind of like the startup culture, literally, of esports? And I mean, Stratton, if you want to talk about that, I guess.
There's nothing bad can come of moving from esports 1.0 to esports 2.0, where you begin to get the non-endemic sponsors, you begin to get the more professional organization, you begin to get the cross-promotion from the professional sports team into. I mean, I think this is a well-known fact that most NBA players and most NFL players are video gaming enthusiasts. They play. Jared Jeffries, who is our president of EchoFox, 13 years in the NBA. He and Tim Duncan used to get in trouble from Popovich because they would stay up till 4 a.m. playing Call of Duty, and then they'd walk in tired to practice. So that's the pro athlete crossover here is going to also be very, very healthy for this, right? Another set of if you will, people they can learn from and the rest. And I think that all of making it a professional business is like when the internet went from the anarchists who thought everything should be free to all of a sudden we have an Amazon and we have VeriSign and the rest. So it's just a natural progression and mostly good.
I mean, just for perspective, like again, from the traditional stick and ball side, esports, whether it's been around for 10 or 15 years or not, it's in its infancy. Let's remember that it took NBA 50 years to get to where, in a place where it actually was structured. The NFL 30 years. Like, we still have a little ways to go. And the other thing I would say, and this is just my opinion, there's nothing wrong, especially in esports, there's nothing wrong with structure. Structure is good for esports and good for the ecosystem.
It's a good point. I want to talk about advertising and revenue because this will all be gone in 5 years and we can't figure out how to make money from it. So, Craig, from a broadcaster's perspective, are advertisers, jumping on board yet?
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously the endemics are there. We've had a lot of success with the non-endemics. I think that there's obviously, transparently. There's challenges with some of the first-person shooters games. But I think most of all, I think people need to really understand this, again, this model of engagement and this collective metric of buying by the brand instead of just looking at the CPM or the rating or even the uniques for that matter, and understanding how to integrate their brand with esports and the ecosystem of esports. Because if you come in and you try to shove something, sell something and shove it down the community's throats, they're going to reject you. But if you integrate your brand and you're supportive of the ecosystem and the community, then they're going to embrace you and support you. I told this story the other day where literally at the major, we had 5,000 people at the Fox Theater. At one point, they were all chanting Arby's. I don't know any sports.
The restaurant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, the fast food restaurant. I don't know any sports event that's ever chanted the sponsor's name, and mostly because what Arby's did is they came in, they understood, they listened to the community, they did their research, they used the IP to help support and sell their brand by blowing up sandwiches. I don't know if you guys saw the ads. And then they said, what else can we do? So we took the teams to high-powered rifle firing ranges, and we started blowing away Arby's sandwiches, and then it became a competition, and that became a content integrated into the shows themselves. And next thing you know, Arby's was part of the community when it came to E-League and specifically Counter-Strike. So that was a case study where we saw a true engagement. And that's really how it needs to execute. Now, if there's brands that just don't want to be in first-person shooters, that's totally understandable. But I think everybody understands the coveted demo that is with and the amount of an engagement that goes with esports. They are all bullish on it. But in fairness, like the code necessarily hasn't been cracked yet.
Well, and so I remember this story very well. This is 95 and 96. The internet's all of a sudden becoming noticed. You've got Yahoo, Netscape, VeriSign, and Amazon all getting started. And everybody's business model was it's going to be internet advertising. And guess what? That advertising didn't come from the non-endemics and the internet for another 2 or 3 years. So there was a lot of disillusionment and the rest. You cannot ignore the engagement numbers. You just can't. You couldn't ignore that they went from 1 million domain names to 1 billion, right, within a 5 or 6 year period. That's presence on the internet, meaning more consumers are going there. Same thing here with the viewerships and esports and the growth of the fan bases. An advertiser cannot ignore this, and so it'll go 5% of spend to 10% of spend. Eventually, you'll see 20% of spend in esports spending from the traditional advertisers who cover sports.
I mean, one interesting metric from the inside out, which we didn't expect, is esports in the first 2 seasons. So last year, in the first 2 seasons of Counter-Strike, drove 9 million new people to TBS. People that would never have gone to TBS for any other reason. It still didn't represent itself in ratings necessarily, but it was 9 million new people that went there. And I'm not sure I know IP that could bring 9 million new people to a network or any platform for that matter. So it becomes very important to look at the metrics, and obviously the engagement, but look at them from all angles.
Got it. So we only have a minute or two left. Heather, I want to talk about the life cycle of these games. Like an Overwatch League is being formed now, but is this game going to last 10 years, and what happens when it fizzles out? I mean, football is going to be popular forever, baseball, hockey, but a video game goes out of style, the tech goes out of style. How do you combat that?
Yeah, I mean, Overwatch is certainly new. It's hard to know where that game is going to go, but I look at Counter-Strike, for example. It's been around since 1999, and it's as strong as ever. But a lot of these games have kind of a natural transition to a new genre. So, for example, PUBG has just exploded. It is now the most watched game on Twitch, finally surpassed League of Legends, and a lot of Counter-Strike players and a lot of Overwatch players has navigated over to that game. So it's kind of an easy transition for these games. It's easy transition for the athletes too. A lot of the skills transition to other games. And
tell me, do these games kind of come naturally? I mean, this is like a minute, 30-second answer, but tell me, how do games come to be?
So esports, it's very organic. A lot of the publishers have said, we're going to make an esports, here it is. it doesn't necessarily survive. It's the community that kind of builds that up. The tournaments a lot of times happened because the community wanted them to happen. That's what's most fascinating. So the esports part of it is very organic, and the community has built that up.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.